Hey everybody. I first want to apologize for my voice. I've definitely caught that whooping cough that's been going around, and on the road to recovery, it's been a little bit of a rough week and a half. But I really wanted to get this video out there. You know, First, let me say welcome to the 339 subscribers that I have. So happy that you're here. And if you're new, I really appreciate you giving me the time. Now, the story this week is a very popular one amongst really big music fans. A lot of indie channels covered this band. I'm sure this story has been told so many numerous times, but I couldn't make this channel without touching on this band. They are, even though if you've just stuck with them for their first 3 singles off their first album, you know how big of a deal this band was when they came out. They were massive on the music scene. And what's really interesting is, I wouldn't really say MGMT did anything new. I'm sure people love them, for their lyrics. They love them for the blend of musical styles, their usage of synth along with their kind of guitar driven riffs. But to say they completely reshaped something or, experimented with something brand new, that I would venture to say to be untrue. But that first album, those first 3 singles were so big, they almost didn't have any choice. This is really a story of what happens when a band is caught between multiple things. One of them is when they want to make music that they're happy with. One of them is what happens when your record label becomes dissatisfied with you. And what happens when you achieve popularity too quickly. So this is the story of MGMT. Now, again, I'm focusing on this aspect of the story. This isn't going to be so much a chronological way of telling it, maybe just a little bit, but, I really want to focus on that narrative, those themes. So MGMT releases Oracular Spectacular, which is their very first album, right? And there are 3 hits off that album. And when I say hits, it's kind of an understatement, because one hit is Kids, the other hit is Time to Pretend, and the last hit is Electric Feel. Those songs are played on radio set lists, on playlists, constantly. You'll hear one of them. I mean, heck, Time to Pretend was used in Spider-Man Homecoming trailer, right? A couple of years ago. Those songs were everywhere, and in the indie music scene, you couldn't ignore them. At the early 2000s when MGMT started to get popular, you had your massive indie bands, Arcade Fire, Block Party, Franz Ferdinand. But MGMT just came roaring out of America, and you paid attention to them. And what was interesting is, as soon as, people kind of started to dig their hits, the biggest question was going to be, how were they going to follow up these hits? What were they going to do next? And that led to the making of their next album, Congratulations. And it's funny because right away in interviews, MGMT, especially their 2 front leaders, their co-singers and guitar players, they wanted to make it very abundantly clear to people that they were shifting focus away from their first album. That's when we started to get inklings that as much and as big as those 3 hits were, they were not the sound that MGMT was shooting for, that dance pop sound that started to get huge in the early 2000s again. They wanted to make deeper, more psychological albums that, you would sit down and listen to, rather than maybe a song somebody would blast on a speaker and people would start dancing to, right? They didn't like that. And that's when they released Congratulations. And I would say Congratulations only got big because it crested off that wave off of Oracular Spectacular. I'm not saying it's good or bad musically. In fact, there are quite a few songs I liked on that second album. I digged it. I even respected, I remember when it came out, I respected them for that decision to kind of leave the pop mainstream world behind and wanting to focus on what they wanted to make as music. Now that's where they started to run into those problems, because people that were pretty much just there for the likes of the first album listened to a few of, I wouldn't even say they listened to the album, they heard a first of the few hits or singles that they released off that album, and right away they decided, nah, this isn't for me, this is not the MGMT that I was listening to, and they didn't give the album a chance. Another group of people that didn't give MGMT a chance was their label. I believe, and let me pull it up really quick, but I believe MGMT was with Columbia Records at the time, especially coming off of their first album. Yes, Columbia and Red Ink Records, starting all the way back in 2006. And their record company was not happy with the way MGMT was kind of parading around, because they were making it abundantly clear. There are many people that have posted online about their MGMT experience going to concerts during those days. This was around 2009, I believe, to like 2011. And they would say sometimes they wouldn't even play their hits. They would say, I saw a couple posts that they would play one of them like 3 times, and then they wouldn't play the other 2 hits. I heard that they would play like Kids. I think Kids was the one that they disliked the most out of the 3 hits to play. And I saw a couple posts that they would just play Kids out of their speakers and would just kind of mess around on stage, or maybe even leave, I don't know, but they would refuse to play Kids. And so they were making it blatantly obvious that they were not liking the direction that they came from, their kind of like their origin, and they were almost like making fun of it, like they weren't taking it seriously. Now, of course, that when money starts getting involved, because I'm sure Columbia Records did not see the big payday of Congratulations that they were expecting. And so they really hammered home for them for their third album that they needed them to go back to how they were. And what's interesting is when I looked up research into the making of their third album, which was self-titled MGMT, that MGMT hinted in interviews leading up to the album that this was almost the most controlled environment that they were in, that they were being watched, that their producers were just really not giving them the creative freedom that they were looking for. Now, don't get me wrong. A lot of the fans, and this is where, you get into that fight with fans versus the band versus music. They don't feel pity for MGMT. Or they see like, well, you guys were paid probably hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars just off of that first album alone. That like you probably could live off of those 3 songs forever just based off of royalties. Why do you complain about it? And that's where you go back to, well, you have to remember that a lot of musicians are artists. They care about their art. They care about which direction musically that their band is going. And I'm sure MGMT was no exception. And it showed, their third album, which I said was self-named MGMT, was the lowest one. And I think like out of 10 stars, it got like 6 out of 10. So it was just the most lukewarm response. And honestly, I believe at that time, that's when the music world turned their backs on them. You know, a lot of their fans probably turned their backs on them. And it showed, and if anything, it kind of fueled them into their fourth studio album, which again was done through Columbia Records, but I believe enough time had kind of passed that Columbia kind of loosened their hold on MGMT, because it had almost been 5 years. You know, I remember at the time, because now this is in the mid 2010s, we're talking 2015 now at this point, 2016. I think a lot of fans wondered if MGMT was even a band anymore, you know, or if they were even going to make new music anymore. They kind of just gave up on them at that point. And what's interesting is a lot of their songs based off their album is kind of introspective. You know, it kind of goes into, because Andrew and Benjamin, the two leading guys of MGMT, they took time off for about a year and a half, you know, in between touring from their last album until then. And it's almost like they pulled a postal service where they started to email and send each other tidbits of songs over and over again. And that's kind of like how they wrote that entire album. And it's kind of just like them reflecting on where they were in their lives, where they were as a band. And honestly, this album, I need to give it another listen. It's been a long time. But I've heard from a lot of MGMT fans and even from critics that this is a band, or this is an album to turn back into. You know, this is an album to check out. The name of it is Little Dark Age. And yeah, a lot of times it says that it's a return to form from where they were. Nowadays, MGMT, they have released new music even. They released an album in 2024 actually called Loss of Life. And it looks like they've kind of returned back to the way that they were. I don't really know where they stand right now as regards to where they came from. I believe they learned a lesson from it. You know, it's almost a warning of what happens when you turn your back completely on the music and completely on the fans and focus a little too much about what you want to do. But at the same time, is that such a bad thing? I don't know. That's all I got for today. What do you guys think of MGMT? You know, where do you stand? Have you listened to their new music? Again, I apologize for the voice. I really hope next week I'll be back to form, and I will talk to y'all next week.